wind howled through the dense forest, its icy fingers clawing at the trees and sending shivers down Ethan's spine. The snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the world in a cold, unyielding white. He adjusted the strap of his rifle, his breath visible in the freezing air, and pressed forward. The forest was silent, save for the occasional creak of branches weighed down by ice. Ethan had been tracking a deer for hours, but the trail had gone cold. His stomach growled, a reminder of the dwindling supplies back at his cabin. He needed to bring something home. His family was counting on him. Ethan was no stranger to the wilderness. Born and raised in the shadow of the mountains, he had learned to hunt and survive from his father, a man as rugged and unyielding as the land itself. His father had been a legend in their small mountain village, a hunter whose skills were unmatched. He had taught Ethan everything he knew: how to track, how to read the signs of the forest, and how to respect the wild. The forest gives and the forest takes, his father would say. Respect it or it will break you. But life in the mountains was harsh, and even the most skilled hunters sometimes returned empty-handed. Ethan's father had passed away 5 years ago, leaving Ethan to carry on the family legacy. Now, with a family of his own, Ethan felt the weight of those words more than ever. His wife, Sarah, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, depended on him. The winters were long, and the snow piled high, cutting them off from the nearest town for months at a time. If Ethan didn't bring home game, they would go hungry. The thought gnawed at him, a constant ache in his chest. Sarah was a strong woman, resilient and resourceful, but even she had her limits. She had grown up in a village, the daughter of a blacksmith, and had known hardship all her life. But the past few winters had been particularly brutal. The deer were scarce, and the fish in the nearby river had all but disappeared. Sarah had done her best to stretch their meager supplies, making soups from bones and roots, but it wasn't enough. Ethan could see the worry in her eyes, the way she would glance at Lily when she thought he wasn't looking. Their daughter was too young to understand the gravity of their situation, but she could sense the tension in the air. Lily was Ethan's pride and joy, a bright and curious child with her mother's fiery spirit and her father's love for the outdoors. She would often accompany Ethan on his shorter hunting trips, her small hand clutching his as they walked through the forest. She loved to listen to his stories about the animals and the mountains, her eyes wide with wonder. But as the winters grew harsher, Ethan had to leave her behind more often, venturing deeper into the forest in search of game. It broke his heart to see the disappointment on her face, but he knew he had no choice. Just last winter, Ethan had failed. A harsh storm had driven the deer deeper into the forest, and after days of searching, he had returned with nothing but frostbite and a heavy heart. He would never forget the look in Lily's eyes as she asked, "Daddy, did you find food?" He had knelt down, his throat tight, and promised her, "Next time, sweetheart, I'll bring home something big." That failure haunted him. He had let his family down, and the memory of their empty plates and hollow stares was a constant reminder of his inadequacy. Sarah had tried to reassure him, telling him that they would get by, but Ethan could see the strain in her face. She was doing her best to keep their spirits up, but the fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. This winter, Ethan was determined not to fail. He had spent the autumn preparing, setting traps, and stocking up on what little supplies they could afford. But it wasn't enough. The snow had come early, and the deer were even scarcer than before. Ethan knew he had to venture farther into the forest, into the heart of the mountains, where the game was more plentiful, but the dangers were greater. It was a risk, but he had no other choice. The morning he left, the sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. Sarah had packed him a small bundle of food, dried meat, and hard bread, and handed it to him with a forced smile. "Be careful," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We need you to come back to us." Ethan had nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He had knelt down to Lily, who was clutching her favorite doll, a handmade gift from Sarah. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart," he had said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And I'll bring home something special for you." Lily had looked up at him with those big, trusting eyes, and for a moment, Ethan had felt a surge of guilt. What if he failed again? What if he didn't come back at all? But he had pushed those thoughts aside, forcing a smile as he kissed her forehead. Be good for your mother, he had said, before turning and walking into the forest. As he trudged through the snow, Ethan's mind wandered back to that day. The memory of Lily's face, so full of hope and trust, was both a comfort and a burden. He couldn't let her down. He wouldn't. But as the hours passed and the trail remained cold, doubt began to creep in. What if he was too late? What if the deer had already moved on, leaving him with nothing but empty hands and a broken promise? The wind picked up, howling through the trees and sending a fresh wave of snow swirling around him. Ethan pulled his coat tighter, his fingers numb despite the thick gloves he wore. He had to keep going. He had to find something. Anything. As he paused to catch his breath, a low growl rumbled through the trees. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly he turned, his eyes scanning the shadows. There, just yards away, stood a massive grizzly bear. Its fur was thick and matted with snow, its amber eyes glowing with a primal intelligence. The bear's scarred muzzle twitched as it sniffed the air, its massive body tense and ready. Ethan's hand tightened around his rifle, but he knew this was no ordinary hunt. Deep in the heart of the forest, the grizzly bear stirred. Its massive body, covered in thick matted fur, rose from its den, its amber eyes scanning the snowy landscape. The bear was a creature of instinct, shaped by the harsh rhythms of the wild. It had survived countless winters, each one a test of strength and endurance. But this winter was different. Food was scarce, and the bear's hunger was a constant gnawing presence. The bear's den was nestled in a hollow beneath a rocky outcrop, sheltered from the worst of the wind and snow. It was a place of safety, a sanctuary where the bear could rest and recover from the relentless demands of survival. But even here, the cold seeped in, biting at its fur and reminding it of the challenges that lay ahead. The bear's breath formed clouds in the frigid air as it stepped out into the open, its massive paws sinking into the deep snow. The forest was quiet, the usual sounds of life muted by the blanket of snow. The bear's ears twitched as it listened for any sign of movement, its nose lifted to catch the faintest scent of food. It had been days since its last meal, and the hunger was becoming unbearable. The bear's stomach growled, a low, rumbling sound that echoed through the stillness. It needed to eat, and soon. The bear moved cautiously through the forest, its senses on high alert. It knew the dangers that lurked in the winter, the thin ice, the hidden crevices, the predators that were just as desperate as it was. But it also knew the forest secrets, the places where food might still be found. It followed a familiar trail, its nose pressed to the ground as it searched for the scent of prey. As it walked, the bear's thoughts turned to its cubs. They were back in the den, sleeping soundly, unaware of the struggles their mother faced. The bear had given birth to 2 cubs in the spring, and they had been her constant companions ever since. She had taught them how to hunt, how to fish, and how to navigate the dangers of the forest. But this winter had been harder than most, and the bear had been forced to leave them alone for longer periods as she searched for food. The memory of her cubs gave the bear strength. She had to survive for their sake. She couldn't let them down. With renewed determination, she pressed on, her eyes scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The bear's ears pricked up as it caught the faint sound of footsteps. It froze, its body tense, as it listened. The sound was unfamiliar, too heavy to be a deer, too deliberate to be a wolf. The bear's nose twitched as it caught the scent of something new. A human. The bear's instincts kicked in, its muscles coiling as it prepared for a confrontation. Humans were dangerous. They carried fire sticks that could kill from a distance, but they were also weak, slow, and clumsy in the snow. The bear's hunger outweighed its caution. It needed food, and if the human had any, it would take it. The bear moved silently through the forest, its massive paws sinking into the snow. It followed the scent, its eyes narrowing as it spotted the man, Ethan. The bear watched him from the shadows, its breath visible in the cold air. The man was armed, but he looked tired, his movements slow and deliberate. The bear's instincts told it to strike now, while the man was vulnerable. With a deafening roar, the bear charged. The chase. The man froze, his eyes wide with fear as the bear emerged from the shadows. The bear's massive body crashed through the underbrush, its claws tearing at the snow as it closed the distance between them. The man raised his fire stick, but the bear was too fast. It swiped at him, its claws narrowly missing as the man dove behind a tree. The bear roared in frustration, its breath coming in short, angry bursts. It circled the tree, its eyes locked on the man as it searched for an opening. The man was quick, but the bear was stronger. It slammed its massive body into the tree, the impact sending a shower of snow raining down. The man scrambled to his feet, his heart racing as he ran. The bear gave chase, its powerful legs propelling it through the snow. The man was fast, but the bear was faster. It could hear the man's labored breathing, the sound of his boots crunching in the snow. The bear's hunger drove it forward, its instincts telling it that this was its chance. It couldn't let the man escape. The forest blurred around the bear as it ran, its eyes fixed on the man's fleeing form. The man leaped over fallen logs and ducked under low-hanging branches, his movements desperate and frantic. But the bear was relentless, its powerful body cutting through the snow with ease. It could feel the man's fear, the scent of it driving the bear forward. The man spotted a narrow crevice between two large boulders and veered toward it, sliding through just as the bear reached him. The bear roared in frustration, its massive paws clawing at the rocks as it tried to reach him. The man pressed himself against the cold stone, his chest heaving as he watched the bear's furious attempts. For a moment, the bear allowed itself to hope it was so close. But then, the man backed away, his eyes locked on the bear's. He was planning something. The silence that followed was deafening. The bear's heart pounded as it waited, its muscles tense. Suddenly, the ground beneath it shook. The bear looked up just in time to see the man slam his full weight into the boulders, dislodging them. The bear barely had time to roll out of the way as the rocks crashed down, sealing the crevice. The man was trapped. The bear circled him, its growls low and menacing. The man raised his fire stick, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely aim. He fired, the shot echoing through the forest, but the bullet only grazed the bear's shoulder. It roared in pain, its eyes blazing with fury. The man scrambled backward, his mind racing. He was out of options. But then, something unexpected happened. The bear stopped, its head tilting as it sniffed the air. Its ears twitched, and for the first time, the man noticed the fear in its eyes. A low rumble echoed through the forest, growing louder by the second. The ground beneath them began to shake, and the bear realized with horror what was happening in avalanche. The bear let out a panicked roar, its instincts kicking in as it turned and ran. The man hesitated for only a moment before following. The two of them, predator and prey, raced through the forest as the snow cascaded down the mountain behind them. Trees snapped like twigs, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The bear's legs burned with exhaustion, but it pushed itself forward, its survival instincts taking over. They reached a clearing just as the avalanche crashed down behind them, the force of it sending them tumbling into the snow. The bear lay there, gasping for breath, its body aching from the impact. It turned its head, its eyes meeting the man's. For a moment, they just stared at each other, their chests heaving as the snow settled around them. The man's eyes were no longer filled with fear. They were calm, almost grateful. The bear slowly sat up, its massive body tense, but not threatening. It was as if they had reached an unspoken understanding. They were both survivors, bound by the same instinct to live. The bear let out a low growl, its breath visible in the cold air, before turning and disappearing into the forest. The forest was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made Ethan's skin crawl. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself was waiting for something to happen. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes locked on the bear, his heart pounding in his chest. The bear, too, was still, its massive body tense, its amber eyes flickering with something Ethan couldn't quite place: fear? Recognition? He didn't have time to figure it out. Then it came, A low, distant rumble, like the growl of some ancient beast waking from its slumber. The sound was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder with each passing second. Ethan's breath hitched as he felt the ground beneath him tremble, the vibrations traveling up through his boots and into his bones. He turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the mountainside. What he saw made his blood run cold. A wall of snow was barreling down the mountain, a white tsunami that devoured everything in its path. Trees snapped like twigs, their trunks splintering under the sheer force of the avalanche. The sound was deafening, a roar that drowned out all other noise, even the bear's panicked growls. Ethan's mind raced, his instinct screaming at him to run, but his legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. The bear let out a deafening roar, its body twisting as it turned to face the oncoming avalanche. For a moment, Ethan and the bear locked eyes, their mutual fear bridging the gap between predator and prey. There was no time for hesitation, no time for fear. Survival was the only thing that mattered. The bear was the first to move, its powerful legs propelling it forward as it bolted down the slope. Ethan followed, his legs pumping as he sprinted through the snow. The avalanche was gaining on them, its icy fingers reaching out to claim them. Ethan's lungs burned with every breath, the cold air searing his throat as he pushed himself to run faster. He could hear the bear's heavy footsteps behind him, its growls mingling with the roar of the avalanche. The forest was a blur of white and green as Ethan ran, his eyes darting from side to side, searching for any sign of safety. He spotted a cluster of large boulders up ahead, their jagged edges jutting out of the snow like the teeth of some ancient monster. It was their only chance. Ethan veered toward the rocks, his heart pounding as he prayed they would hold against the avalanche's force. The bear was right behind him, its massive body moving with surprising agility as it navigated the treacherous terrain. Ethan reached the rocks first, diving into the narrow gap between them just as the bear skidded to a stop beside him. The two of them pressed themselves against the cold stone, their bodies trembling as the avalanche roared past. The force of the snow was unimaginable, a tidal wave of ice and debris that threatened to crush them. Ethan clung to the rocks, his fingers numb from the cold as the snow slammed into the boulders, sending shockwaves through his body. The bear let out a panicked roar, its claws digging into the stone as it fought to stay upright. For a moment, Ethan thought they wouldn't make it, that the rocks would give way, and they would be buried alive. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the avalanche passed. The world fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of Ethan and the bear. They were alive, but barely. The snow had piled up around them, sealing them in a narrow pocket of air. Ethan's heart raced as he looked around, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The bear was crouched beside him, its massive body pressed against the rocks. Its fur was matted with snow, and its breath came in short, labored bursts. Ethan could see the fear in its eyes, the same fear that was coursing through his own veins. For a moment, they just stared at each other, their mutual survival, creating an unspoken bond. Ethan's body ached, his muscles screaming in protest as he shifted his weight. He was bruised and battered, but alive. The bear, too, seemed to be injured, its movements slow and deliberate as it tried to stand. Ethan watched it cautiously, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle, but he stopped himself. The bear had saved him in a way. If it hadn't been there, he might not have made it to the rocks in time. The bear let out a low growl, its eyes locking onto Ethan's. There was no malice in its gaze, only exhaustion and something else, something Ethan couldn't quite place. Respect? Gratitude? He didn't know. All he knew was that they had survived, and for now that was enough. Slowly, the bear stood, its massive body towering over Ethan. It took a step forward, its movements cautious, as if it was testing the ground beneath its feet. Ethan held his breath, his heart pounding as the bear approached. But instead of attacking, the bear simply looked at him, its amber eyes filled with a quiet intensity. Then, without warning, the bear turned and disappeared into the forest, its massive form blending into the snowy landscape. Ethan watched it go, his mind reeling from the encounter. He had come to the forest to hunt, to provide for his family, but he had found something far more profound, a respect for the wild, for the creatures that called it home. As he made his way back to his cabin, Ethan couldn't help but reflect on what had happened. The bear had been a force of nature, a reminder of the power and unpredictability of the wild. But it had also been a survivor, just like him. In that moment, they had been equals, bound by the same instinct to live. When Ethan finally reached his cabin, Sarah and Lily rushed out to meet him. Lily threw her arms around his legs, her face lighting up with relief. "Daddy, you're back," she exclaimed. Ethan knelt down, pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm here, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah stood nearby, her eyes filled with tears. "We were so worried," she said softly. Ethan stood, pulling her into his arms. "I'm sorry," he murmured, "but I learned something out there. Something important." As the sun set behind the mountains, Ethan sat by the fire with his family, sharing the story of the bear. Lily listened with wide eyes, her imagination captivated by the tale. "Will the bear be okay, Daddy?" she asked. Ethan smiled, ruffling her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. The bear is strong, just like us." The forest was quiet now, the avalanche's roar replaced by the soft crunch of snow beneath Ethan's boots. His body ached with every step, his muscles protesting the strain of the day's events. His ribs throbbed where the bear had swiped at him, and his hands were raw and numb from the cold. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the storm of emotions raging inside him. As he trudged through the snow, Ethan's mind replayed the encounter with the bear. He had gone into the forest as a hunter, armed with his rifle and his determination to provide for his family. But he had come out as something else, a man humbled by the power of nature, a man who had looked into the eyes of a predator and seen a kindred spirit. The bear had been a force of nature, a creature of instinct and survival. But it had also been a mirror, reflecting back at Ethan his own struggles, his own will to live. In that moment, when they had faced the avalanche together, they had been equals, not man and beast, but two survivors bound by the same primal instinct. Ethan's breath came in short, labored bursts, the cold air stinging his lungs. The snow was deep, and every step was a battle against the weight of it. His legs burned with exhaustion, but he pushed himself forward, driven by the thought of his family waiting for him at home. Sarah and Lily needed him. He couldn't let them down. As he walked, Ethan's thoughts turned to his daughter. Lily was only 6, but she was already so much like him, curious, brave, and full of wonder. She loved the forest, loved the stories he told her about the animals and the mountains, but she was also innocent, unaware of the harsh realities of life in the wilderness. Ethan had always tried to shield her from that, to protect her from the struggles he faced as a hunter and a provider. But now, he wondered if he had done her a disservice. Maybe she needed to know the truth, that life was hard, that nature was both beautiful and unforgiving, and that survival required respect, not just strength. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the snow. Ethan's stomach growled, a reminder that he hadn't eaten since morning. He reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of dried meat, chewing it slowly as he walked. It wasn't much, but it would keep him going until he reached home. As he neared the edge of the forest, Ethan's heart began to race. He could see the smoke rising from the chimney of his cabin, a beacon of warmth and safety in the cold, white landscape. The sight filled him with a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that he was almost home, that he would soon be with his family. Guilt that he had failed to bring back the food they so desperately needed. But as he stepped into the clearing, Ethan realized that he had brought back something else, something just as important. He had brought back a story, a lesson, a reminder of the bond between man and nature. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The door of the cabin burst open before Ethan could even knock. Lily came running out, her small feet sinking into the snow as she threw herself into his arms. "Daddy," she cried, her voice filled with relief and joy. Ethan knelt down, pulling her into a tight hug. Her small body was warm against his, and he could feel her heart racing as she clung to him. I'm here, sweetheart, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm here. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale with worry. She was holding a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and her eyes were red from crying. When she saw Ethan, she let out a sob and rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him and Lily. You're alive, she whispered, her voice trembling. We were so worried. When the storm hit and you didn't come back, I thought. Ethan held her tightly, his own eyes filling with tears. I'm sorry, he murmured. I'm so sorry. For a long moment, they just stood there, holding each other as the snow fell around them. Then Sarah pulled back, her hands cupping Ethan's face as she searched his eyes. What happened? She asked. Are you hurt? Ethan shook his head, though the movement made his ribs ache. I'm fine, he said, but something happened out there. Something I need to tell you. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Ethan sat by the fire, his hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea as Sarah and Lily listened to his story. He told them everything: the bear, the chase, the avalanche, and the moment of mutual survival. He told them about the fear, the respect, and the unspoken bond that had formed between him and the bear. Lily's eyes were wide with wonder as she listened, her small hands clutching her doll. Did the bear hurt you, Daddy? She asked, her voice trembling. Ethan shook his head. No, sweetheart. The bear was scared, just like me. We were both trying to survive. Sarah reached out, her hand resting on Ethan's arm. You could have died, she said softly. You could have been killed. Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting hers. I know, but I wasn't. And I think it's because of the bear. We helped each other, in a way. We both wanted to live. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against Ethan's. I'm just glad you're home, she whispered. That's all that matters. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep and Sarah had gone to bed, Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the mountains. The storm had passed, and the sky was clear, the stars shining like diamonds against the black velvet of the night. The forest was quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire behind him. Ethan's mind was still racing, his thoughts a jumble of emotions and memories. He thought about the bear, about the way its eyes had locked onto his in that moment of mutual understanding. He thought about the avalanche, the sheer power of nature, and the way it had humbled him. And he thought about his family, about the love and strength that had brought him home. As he stood there, a distant roar echoed through the forest, a deep, primal sound that sent a shiver down his spine. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was, the bear. It was out there, somewhere in the wilderness, alive and free. For a moment, Ethan felt a surge of fear, the old instincts kicking in. But then he smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. The bear wasn't a threat. It was a reminder of the power of nature, of the resilience of life, and of the bond that connected all living things. Ethan turned away from the window, his heart full. He had faced the bear, and in doing so, he had found a piece of himself he thought he had lost. He had learned that survival wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about respect, about understanding, and about the will to live. As he climbed into bed beside Sarah, Ethan knew that he would never forget that day. It had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. But one thing was certain: he would never look at the forest or the mountains or the creatures that called him home the same way again. And as he drifted off to sleep, the bear's roar echoed in his dreams, a reminder of the bond they shared and the lessons he had learned. The forest was a place of beauty and danger, of life and death. And Ethan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with respect, with humility, and with the strength of a survivor. At its core, this story is a powerful reminder of the importance of coexisting with the wild. Ethan's encounter with the bear forces him to confront the reality that nature is not something to be conquered or dominated. It is a force to be respected. The bear, a symbol of the untamed wilderness, is not merely a predator but a fellow survivor, struggling against the same harsh conditions as Ethan. Through their shared experience, Ethan learns that survival is not about overpowering nature, but about understanding and respecting its rhythms. The story urges us to see the natural world not as an adversary, but as a partner, one that demands humility and reverence. Both Ethan and the bear embody the themes of survival and resilience. Ethan's journey into the forest is driven by his determination to provide for his family, a testament to the lengths humans will go to protect those they love. The bear, too, is a survivor, navigating the brutal winter with strength and instinct. Their parallel struggles highlight the universal will to live, a force that transcends species. The story celebrates the resilience of life, showing that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the instinct to survive can forge. The encounter between Ethan and the bear challenges the traditional narrative of man versus nature. Instead of being locked in a battle to the death, Ethan and the bear find themselves united by a common threat, the avalanche. In that moment of crisis, their roles as predator and prey dissolve, replaced by a shared instinct to survive. This unlikely bond underscores the idea that even the fiercest adversaries can find common ground when faced with a greater challenge. It is a poignant reminder that connection and understanding can emerge in the most unexpected places. The story's twist, the avalanche and the mutual survival of man and bear, leaves readers in awe. It defies expectations, transforming what could have been a simple tale of survival into a profound exploration of the human-animal bond. The unbelievable nature of their shared experience serves as a metaphor for the unpredictability of life itself. It reminds us that the world is full of surprises and that even in the most dire circumstances, there is room for hope, connection, and transformation. Man versus bear. What happens next is unbelievable, is more than just a story of survival. It is a meditation on the power of nature, the resilience of life, and the bonds that connect us all. Through Ethan's journey, we are reminded that the wild is not something to be feared or conquered, but something to be respected and cherished. The bear's distant roar, echoing through the forest, serves as a lasting reminder of the lessons Ethan learned. That survival is not just about strength, but about understanding. That even in the face of danger, there is room for connection, and that the natural world, in all its beauty and brutality, is a force to be revered.